Used to Sew, a podcast about sewing machines, sewing history, and sewing culture in the past and present. I am your producer and co-host Aradia, daughter of your main host, T.R. Kelly, who is here today to talk to you about space sewing. Sewing in space. Mostly sewing on Earth, actually, but for the purposes of spaceflight. And an illustrated children's book about the topic because it's just too cool not to share. Did you like that unique version of the opening riff? That is a TR original tune, and you can hear in that her deep and abiding love for all things space. This episode's purpose is to let Mom really marinate in combining her two oldest obsessions, sewing and spaceflight. And, of course, it is a natural progression from our discussion last week about sewing in flight as pioneered by Ida Holdgreve. This week, we pick up with her engineering daughters, who made it possible for humans to go into the vacuum of space safely. We'll start in 1943, just before the space race, when a brave test pilot used his body to show that we needed to develop high-altitude pressure suits if we wanted to keep going higher and higher up. But who would build them? The answer may surprise you. Listen and find out. By the time of the moon landings, the suits were up to a truly mind-boggling number of precision-crafted pieces. The seamstresses had to figure out how to not make pinholes, what old techniques and technologies would serve better than new solutions, and how to satisfactorily explain their craft to engineers who couldn't sew a button. It's a fantastic story of how women have always been crucial to the forward progress of the relatively macho world of test pilots and spaceflight. And I'm sure you will enjoy it as much as I did. I've got a few short info dumps to blast you all with at the end to follow up on a few tangents suggested in the conversation. See you on the other side.
We're threaded, our light bulb is glowing, and it smells like freshly pressed fabric. Good morning, people, or night if you're one of those night sewers. I mean, that's the beauty of modern tech. Even though I sit around and wait for us on Sunday morning, because I like to listen to us like a listener to see like what all the cool stuff Aradia put in after I blabbed my content weeks and weeks ago. And a lot of times I will have forgotten what we even talked about. And I'm like, ooh, this is cool.
You ever find yourself making comments that then you make in the recording? You're like thinking something and then recorded you says that very thing.
Yes, it is. It's like, oh, I hope she remembers to talk about. Yes, there it is. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty fun. But then, sometimes I'm so excited about the content, I forget to select the correct microphone. So what was it? Our audio, I want to give a shout out to our post-production, our mixing and sound guy, Randy Hom. I mean, I blab, Aradia puts it all together into a show, and then she sends it off to him, and he presses it with starch.
Yes, the audio equivalent of starch pressing.
It's nice and crisp by the time you guys get it. But anyway, he said, what's wrong with TR's vocal in this one? And oops. So we try, folks. But you know what? It's the audio equivalent of a seam ripper. And sometimes there's just too many holes in the fabric and you just going to have to let it go. So if you hear one of them sounds weird, don't worry. It's slubs and variations are a natural part of the fabric.
Yeah, it's fine. Just sometimes to err is human, and we're a very small production company, so we just roll with it.
We roll with it, and that's why we're charming, is because we dare to mess up. But there's some places that you can't mess up. This leads me into today's topic. I'm not going to even start about sewing machines or anything. Well, there's definitely a sewing machine in this story. But continuing on with last week, we talked about aerospace, airplanes. I remember we talked about Ida Holdgreve, who answered the ad for plane sewing, and she thought it meant plain dresses, but it was airplanes. So therefore, Ida became the first female aerospace worker. It's in 1911, I think. We're going to continue Ida's story on up into the space age. Because we talked a little bit about last week about things like kites and balloons and parachutes and even sailing ships and all the ways that people have used fabric to propel themselves in some way. Even before the invention of sewing machines, they were weaving and stitching together big pieces of fabric because they want to go fast. Isn't that humans? We just want to go fast.
More fast, more better.
That's right. We want our needle to go fast. We want ourselves to go fast. So after the airplane age, and humans decided, hey, what about space? Well, we're going to need some special fabrics for space.
Space fabric.
Fabric, the final frontier. Oh, yeah. I'm back with this great book that we've been skipping through here and there. The Golden Thread, How Fabric Changed History. Now, Aradia just told me there's another book out there called The Golden Thread, and it's not about fabric. So make sure you get the one. It's The Golden Thread, How Fabric Changed History by Kasia St. Clair. And this chapter, she's talking about as we take fabric into the space age. Okay, so I'm going to start reading a little bit here. During the Second World War, with more people taking to the air than ever before, technology leapt forward. A series of experiments were undertaken to test the limits of the human body at speed and altitude. In June 1943, this crazy pilot named Randy jumped from a plane into air at 40,000 feet, 60 degrees below zero, to test pressurized breathing equipment. Basically, what happened was they figured out that he didn't have the right clothes to do something like that. He froze his hands. He had his eyeballs boiled. I mean, he lived. But it became obvious that we were going to have to design some kind of special suit.
Wow.
To go up that high.
We figured out we needed that by having a man discover how desperately we need that. Oof.
Oh, actually, before that, during the days of ballooning, people didn't know how high they could go, and several people went too high and died.
Oh, but there wasn't any good science to draw from it other than there is such a thing as an upper limit. No one knew necessarily where it was. Man. Space is the most alien environment into which a human being can survive. You know, so yeah, in ballooning days, they had no idea how far up the sky went, right? So for science, let's stitch together a balloon and see just how far. But when they finally find the bodies, their eyeballs are popped out and their tongues have boiled. And obviously they've gone up into the vacuum of space. The balloon then pops, right? And it all falls back down. Because that's how weather balloons get down. They get up so far and then rupture. Right. And then they come down. I have a friend that does weather balloons. It's so cool. So if we're going to go up that high, we need some sort of protective garments. Okay, so we need to keep the pressure and temperature within normal human operating parameters.
Exactly.
Oh, and also oxygen. That's also very important.
And oxygen. Yes. So after pilot Randy jumped out of his plane, the conclusion was drawn that high altitudes and high speeds, the limits of human endurance, were close at hand, and a moment's misjudgment could prove lethal. Even airmen in high-altitude bombing planes at that time, we're talking post-World War II here, and then into the nuclear age, pilots had to wear layers of shearling, silk, and wool to protect them from the cold. Later on in the war, gunners in exposed positions often used heated suits. So here we are at the very upper limit of airplanes in World War II, and they're figuring out how to plug their guys in so they don't freeze up there.
I remember reading a couple of stories about parachuters, I believe in the World War II era, who got caught in thunderstorms.
Oh my gosh.
And got taken up really, really high.
Oh,
and like back up and down and up and down, basically becoming human hailstones.
I was going to say hailstones. Yeah. Wow.
Quite literally. And some of them survived and got to, tell the tale of what their recollections of the winds was. And yet going up so high that it's too cold to breathe properly was because that's how thunderstorms work, right? It's not to space, but there was still an impression. I mean, the human hailstone thing is it's partially it's the moisture, but also just part of that's how hailstones get made is they go up to where it's very, very cold.
Damn.
It's not the same thing as space, but it's indicative of the fact that going up is cold.
Thinking of the tops of like anvil top cumulonimbus clouds in the summer, and they go up like 50,000 feet and then get sheared off.
Yeah, and then they smush against a different layer of atmosphere. That's then hitting a different density as the atmosphere thins, and it's very cool physics.
I mean, I like flying, but I think I'll stick to the Airbus 320 set of space vehicles.
Yeah.
Anything by Boeing, I'll stay down here. So first thing they invented was a suit that could get you down. All right, it wasn't meant to be a live thing. It was this rigid, cumbersome thing with lots of straps and stuff that would just keep you alive until you could get down and do your spacesuit. But by the mid-50s, when the advent of rocket-propelled planes brought the prospect of sending people into space, efforts to create reliable, comfortable, pressurized suits redoubled. All right, we got to get this. We can't go to space until we have the right clothes.
You need to be able to maneuver and manipulate objects and change your position in space. You need both of those things to be true at once.
So here's a lot of business of how they're like figuring out what they're going to need to do. Like, what's the parameters? Now, who's going to build it? Okay, so behind the scenes wrangling between contractors vying for NASA's affection and dollars. Going on about the intensity of the competition. Given this intensity, it's even more surprising that the final victor, who won the contract for the spacesuits, was the most unexpected. Playtex, maker of women's underwear.
Okay. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. What?
Because what do they have experience sewing? All kinds of complex rubber and mesh.
Weird materials.
That have to fit the body a certain way.
Form-fitting, strange materials. You know what? That's actually a super solid pitch. We're not in the business of making tailored garments. We're in the business of making weird bodysuits.
So, Playtex, also known as International Latex Company, was a small firm, no more than 50 employees in 1962, whose area of expertise lay in latex molding of bras and girdles. They sent in a prototype. Its suit's novel feature was that the molded rubber bladder was internally bonded to nylon restraints, which prevented it from ballooning. So, all these things to make sure that if you went outside the ship, you're not going to turn into a balloon.
Uh-huh.
And
right.
When there's too much, so in low pressure environments, the suit has to stay close. There's lots of testing here where guys went out and their suits puffed up and they couldn't get back in the ship.
Uh-huh.
This happened to some Soviet dudes and they had to let the air out so they could get back in.
Man, that's not a situation that you should be in space.
Okay, but this is the funny part. Okay, so making the spacesuit, there's a lot of wrangling here because we're doing something new. The problem was a clash of cultures. NASA was made up of engineers and scientists who required precise technical drawings, scientific explanations, and detailed descriptions of the origin of each component inside every single item that would be sent into space, down to the tiniest screw or wisp. Playtex, on the other hand, had a culture that was scrappy and folksy. It relied on teams of experienced seamstresses who read patterns rather than technical manuals and privileged craft and grit over qualifications.
Yeah, that's kind of classic to NASA across a lot of different spectrums, right? Like many different layers of NASA, that's the clash is, are you certified or do you actually know how to get the job done? Like that clash. Every story about NASA, fictional or historic, that's like a feature of the world building.
Okay, so they did a bunch of testing and stuff, and NASA had to go, all right, here we go. Despite NASA's objections, the making of what was to become known as the Omega suit was much more akin to making bras and girdles than anyone at the space agency would have cared to admit.
That's so funny. All of these square, prudish men being like, you sewed a what for the who now?
Oh, yeah. So here we go. Ida Holdgreve, who's sewing for the Wright brothers. Here's your daughters. Each suit was fashioned by hand on a sewing floor populated entirely by women. Seamstresses, pattern cutters, and makers using adapted Singer sewing machines, standard pattern templates, and the skills both inherent and honed from years of making women's underwear.
Boom.
Those who had been trained to mold liquid latex found themselves making pressure bladders instead. So instead of making bras, we're doing this stuff, but it's working with the same material.
Right, and kind of to the same purpose, fitting the curves of the squishy, unique human body.
Yeah.
Just, men that are going to space rather than women that are going to bed.
Ellen Foraker, an experienced seamstress, was pulled from Playtex's diaper assembly line in 1964 to work on the Apollo project.
Because they needed diapers.
The Omega spacesuits inherited other things from the firm's main line of work as well. Nylon tricot, a kind of knit mesh embedded in the rubber, used to prevent it from ballooning, was the same sheer fabric used to make Playtex bras. Each spacesuit contained a layer of fluffy girdle liner after complaints were made about the discomfort caused by rubber chafing against the skin. So they're trying to make these comfy.
So are you telling me that spacesuits are lingerie?
Yeah, pretty much. Your new shapewear is spacewear. The exactitude required in making the spacesuits, however, was beyond anything that the seamstresses had encountered before. Pins, for example, usually a staple, were strictly rationed and forbidden. To a garment whose reliability depended on an impermeable rubber bladder, mechanical aids like pins were an inherently risky proposition. In 1967, after a rogue pin was found between the layers of a suit prototype, an X-ray machine was installed in the sewing room floor to scan each layer of fabric produced. Sewing machines were modified to only fire one stitch at a time so that the seamstresses could ensure the seams of these multi-layered garments were precisely straight. They didn't have a Davis vertical feed, man.
That does seem like a bit of a miss on their part. But I guess brand loyalty to Singer?
Well, I guess, I don't know. Davis is long out of business at this point. To meet NASA's exacting standards, seams could deviate no more than 1/64th of an inch. Handling latex and gluing layers together also required previously unheard of levels of skill, and only 3 or 4 of Playtex's employees were considered sufficiently deft to fashion the paper-thin layers of latex. Wow.
Wow. Even with all of that homebrew knowledge and teamwork, only 3 or 4 of them were able to actually meet the required specifications when the rubber met the road, or when the rubber met the nylon, as the case may be.
Okay, now, check out this. We talk about, what needle should I use for sheeting? Okay, what made all this so much harder was that the numbers of layers and types of fabric involved all had to line up precisely with its fellows. Each Omega suit worn on the moon was comprised of some 4,000 separate pieces of fabric and 21 distinct layers of material.
Wow. And I thought a shirt was a lot of pieces.
They talk about Teflon-coated Betacloth, fireproof Silicar, Mylar, Dacron, Nomex, Kapton, all these different types of fabric.
Yeah, some of which have become materials that exist in the world for the rest of us, because that's one of the cool things we get from NASA is a bajillion new materials. But apparently NASA was subcontracting with freaking Playtex to make a lot of this happen.
Well, and they had to learn together, right? How can we pool our skills to make this thing? For the team at ILC, Playtex, the efforts made to transfigure their processes into NASA-style technological documents were bamboozling. We knew all there was to know about suits, Lenny Shepard told an interviewer, but we sure didn't know much about how to document it on paper. So at ILC, transfer of knowledge usually flowed from the bottom up. Craftswomen were encouraged to suggest improvements to procedures, and the firm's engineers took sewing lessons in order to understand the assembly process. In end, to satisfy NASA's preference for technical drawings, ILC employed a team of engineers whose job it was to be both a buffer and a translator between the craftswomen and the technocrats.
Smart.
The result was that from then on, each suit came with its own stack of paper a foot high, covered with technical drawings and engineering jargon, lovingly describing every layer and stitch.
Wow.
Which was entirely separate from and never used by the women actually making them. So the guys documented what they were seeing.
Oh my God, that's beautiful. The company was like, we're not going to pester the actual craftspeople with this bullshit. We're just going to hire someone else to do that just to make NASA happy. Oh my God, that's beautiful.
So here's the last part of this. The astronaut Michael Collins, because of his role overseeing the making of the suits, saw and appreciated the exacting nature of the work. Early on in his memoir, Carrying the Fire, He mentions his responsibility for the suits as part of the mission and calls them a fascinating challenge, combining rigorous engineering with anatomy and anthropology, and he also admitted a little black magic. The craft of the suits was for him something to be admired. The paper-thin bladder of his favorite suit, which kept my 3.7 psi oxygen from escaping into the 0 psi infinity, was glued together with consummate care by some nice ladies in Worcester.
Aww, that's so sweet.
And he says, when you think of a spacewalker, you may visualize a chap confidently exploring the most advanced technology that this rich and powerful nation can provide. But not me, my friends. I see a covey of little old ladies hunched over glue pots in Massachusetts, and I only hope that between discussions of Friday night bingo and the new Monsignor, their attention doesn't wander too far. So it's disparaging and it's like they're kind of embarrassed that they've got to have women help out with this whole thing. With women's skills. Women's skills still have to be, oh, isn't that cute? There's still that, okay?
Oh, can you imagine these big, strong, technological men need women to help them be... Okay.
No, this is before
Back up.
women in space.
But still, the acknowledgement, even tinged with sexism, you love to see it. You love to see them not just being no one.
I mean, the fact that I bet most of our listeners did not know that American spacesuits were made by a bra and girdle company. So there.
I didn't know.
Boobs in space!
This is before there were boobs in space, but boobs went to space before
That's
boobs
true.
went to space. That's what we're getting out of this.
Do you know who the first woman in space was, Radia? First American woman.
Okay. It's like, I know it's a Russian woman and I forget her name. First American woman? It wasn't Sally Ride, was it?
Ride, Sally.
Okay, it was Sally Ride. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. One of my favorite chicks.
Yeah, no, she was awesome.
She has written some cool stuff, especially about the engineers didn't know how many tampons to send her with, so they sent 100.
Good Lord.
So there's been many, many women in space of many nationalities. Now, I can't remember the first Russian woman's name. I'm sure the first name was Valentina. I can't remember the last name.
Oh, yeah. I have the picture of her in my head. It's a beautiful picture of her in the spacesuit thing, and she's very cool.
The first Russian female in space was Laika the dog.
Yeah, true. Yes.
Oh, poor Laika.
Oh, R.I.P. Laika.
Okay, so now we're going to go farther ahead to women in space, but we're still sewing. We have this new kids book that I got, but I enjoyed it myself, and I think everybody should have it in their collection who's into space and or sewing. This is Sew Sister, the untold story of Jean Wright and NASA's seamstresses, written and illustrated by Elise Matich. This is such a cool book. And I read a review, before I even get to the book, I want to read a review of it because it's something that I wondered about looking at the illustrations, actually. So here's the interviewer talking. So many of the details are fascinating. He's talking about the book, which we're going to get to. From the use of a 1914 Singer sewing machine to seeing how Jean and her team helped to guide a repair of the Atlantis shuttle while it was in flight. And Elise says her favorite nuggets, my favorite nuggets from the Sew Sisters story, are those that reveal just how much the shuttle program depended on old-fashioned skills and tools to execute its cutting-edge missions. The 1914 Singer sewing machine is a great example. In keeping with NASA tradition, it was given a nickname. We'll get to that. And it was used to create the dome heat shield blankets that ring the shuttle's main engines. Not only was it an antique, it had originally been used in making another type of transportation technology. Saddles.
What?
Although the Sew Sisters used machines, much of their stitching was done by hand, sewing wheel-well thermal barriers directly onto the shuttles themselves. Now, this is the part I really think is cool. Your illustrations are a lovely combination of realism laced with numerous stitching designs. What is the significance of these patterns? And Elise goes on to explain that it's all free motion quilting designs, which is what I thought. It's like, oh my God, there's so many pretty designs around the pictures in here. Like the shuttle with quilting around it. It's like, I want to do that.
Wow. Okay.
So this book came out in 2023. I mean, any kid that's into STEM should have this book, especially girls. So somebody hyperlexic like you probably could have made sense of this book as a 5-year-old. But I think for most kids, this is going to be in the 8 to 12 age range.
That's a good age range of books that they can start to contain enough information that an adult that wants a fun info dump can still have a good time with it. Once you start to hit that 10-year-old age bracket, it's like, yeah, no, if an adult just wants a fun little info dump, this will still be good.
Well, another really cool thing about this book is the first half of it is the kid's story, and the second half of it is all the research and extra stories in more adult language to give more information. So
this book was written for hyperlexics like me.
Oh.
Like as little kids.
I just want to buy 100 copies of this and give them out to young girls. Really, I do. Okay.
I mean, you could take it to free little libraries. You could take them to kids' summer camp stash type things. Take them to actual libraries that don't have them.
This is a ship that astronauts sailed to the edges of air and gravity. A space shuttle built to orbit the Earth, sped by rockets and covered with blankets. It may sound strange since few people think about sewing as high technology, but each shuttle soared through the star-scattered space in a coat made of panels of fabric. Jean learned to sew with her twin sister Joan in a town known as Flint, Michigan. Ms. Hansford, next door, had no kids of her own, and one morning she offered to teach them. She let them make her steam iron hiss as she schooled them in the simple mysteries like how to match bits of plaid in a seam and press it just so, like a real seamstress. Jean's home was not as happy as some. It was sewing that soothed the brokenness. Frays she could fix, tears she could mend, and in cloth she found freedom and comfort. Soon she could sew clothes for her dolls out of remnants and ragbin finery. She learned how to pin, gather, and trim, and paint quiet pictures with quilting. Jean was 13 when one summer night the world wondered at 2 brave astronauts who took silent steps on crater-cracked land in an untroubled ocean of moon dust. Spellbound, she watched the scene on TV, like an act from a newfound fantasy. She gazed at the moon and quietly vowed to be part of this unfolding story. But what can I do, Jean thought as she worked, saving stories she read in magazines on launches and flights and missions and crews, and filled scrapbooks with hundreds of clippings. Proudly, she sent crew patch designs sketched in crayon to moonbound astronauts, and they wrote her back to kindly decline. Still, it taught her to try and be patient. It was a time when many kids dreamt of becoming NASA scientists or piloting ships with rockets to the moon. It was an age of challenge and change, and women new opportunities. But Flint offered few opportunities to girls without means to afford the expenses of college. Jean married young. Her husband's career in the Navy meant lots of traveling. At last, he asked Jean to choose a new home, and she knew just where she wanted to settle. They moved to a town on Florida's coast, near a point known as Cape Canaveral, where rockets took off and space shuttles soared. It was thrilling simply to be near them. Everything changed one morning by chance. In the paper, she saw a photograph of someone at work on something that looked like a quilt in a story on NASA. It was a seamstress, needle in hand. Jean read the article. It told of a team of women who sewed special blankets to cover the shuttles. NASA, it seemed, did not only need brave explorers and brilliant scientists, but artists to clothe the space shuttle's sides in a patchwork of fireproof fabric. I can do that, Jean thought of her vow and excitedly wrote her resume. She'd just send it in and hope the unit would ask her to join them. Meanwhile, she learned that the seamstresses made their own patterns from detailed blueprints which mapped the shuttle's designs, so she set out to learn how to use them. Night after night, while everyone slept, Jean read blueprints and strove to memorize the strange-sounding names of meshes and cloths that were layered to make up each blanket. Oh, this page has pictures of sewing machines.
I love how, you are telling us the story, but also we're missing out on all the illustrations.
Oh, well, that's why, you need to buy this book, I'm telling you. Months slowly passed, and Jean tried again. She revised and resent her resume. One afternoon, the telephone rang. It was NASA. A seamstress had left the closely knit team of technicians known as the Sew Sisters, and the director was asking to meet her. Jean's skills impressed the interview team, and her passion for space persuaded them. She barely believed it when she received the news she would be working for NASA. Jean's quiet dream was suddenly real, and she found she was not the only girl who'd whispered a pledge that night to the moon and kept it with a thread and needle. She met other girls doing it.
Aww.
The Sew Sisters' work protected the ships as they ferried their fearless passengers from Earth into space and back to Earth. Every quilt had a place and a purpose. Some could withstand the furious heat caused by re-entry. Quartz was used in the cloth, and the lint littered the room with shimmer. Hidden beneath the outermost quilt was another set, thin and delicate. Each one was hand-stitched to keep the crew safe from radiation. There's another picture of a big sewing machine. Some of the most unusual quilts would be sewn by machine. Surprisingly, a sturdy antique from 1914, built for saddles and perfect for spacecraft.
Wow. From saddles to shuttles. Just wow.
Jean loved to watch the shuttles take off. She would smile to know her handiwork would sprint with each ship through sunrising clouds and chase new adventures. But after one launch, worried news came. Atlantis had torn a blanket loose. Jean thought of the ship, her old friend, and the heroes in orbit. There was a chance that on their return, the loose fabric might pull more blankets up, creating a blaze of blistering heat, risking damage or disaster. Back on the ground, the Sew Sisters raced to make blankets in wind test tunnel to see if the crew could keep the small tear from exposing the shuttle to danger. So they're mocking up conditions on the ground to see what they can do.
Right.
Jean and her team helped engineers try using needles to sew the blankets down. But the team's test run uncovered a problem. The astronauts' gloves were bulky and stiff, not intended for nimble needlework. They fumbled the deft and delicate task meant for seamstresses' capable fingers. Thread wouldn't do. What else was on board? What could the astronauts use as a fastener? Then someone suggested that the medical kit was equipped with a surgical stapler. Rigorous tests suggested that yes. So they fixed it.
Wow.
A camera on board allowed Jean to watch an astronaut tuck the blanket back and staple it down with cumbersome care. Thrilled and relieved, the Sew Sisters cheered as the shuttle touched gratefully down, blankets intact, on a bright afternoon 1 week later. After that flight, Atlantis' crew came to thank the seamstresses who'd helped bring them home with the labor of scissors and stitches.
Hell yes.
So then it goes on to just say a few more wonderful things there. And then we have the back of the book, which actually shows pictures and talks more about the fabrics and the sewing machine. And here's a picture of the actual machine, not just a drawing of it. Lurch was the nickname given to the 1914 Singer sewing machine used for creating the shuttle's dome heat shield blankets, which encircle each engine. Originally used in saddle making, the machine was purchased by NASA from a warehouse auction, then refitted with a longer arm to accommodate the blanket. Now, folks my age and older will understand that Lurch was a character in a TV show called The Addams Family.
Oh!
And he's a really tall, gawky, gangly looking, strange fellow.
Yeah.
The actor's name was Ted Cassidy, and he had acromegaly, which makes him look like that. So this machine is big and square and gangly, and those folks being about 10 years older than me, naming it Lurch is like this cultural thing that I totally got. Also, I'm hoping it's not lurching around while it's sewing. That's why I was like, No, it's Lurch with a capital L. So.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
So yeah, a machine that was used to sew horse saddles in 1914.
To say nothing of the fact that the machine was in a warehouse auction. It was lost and dusty and in the back of somewhere. And some NASA dude was like, or gal or whatever, was like, you know what? We're going to yoink you from obscurity and make you the reason our shuttles can exist. How about that?
Sew Sisters sewed with specially engineered thread, including a beige quartz thread, which could withstand temperatures of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This is funny. NASA engineers provided square-headed needles for the seamstresses to use with this hand-for-hand sewing. When they discovered that the needles caused a delicate thread to fray, the ladies went to a craft store and bought curved needles instead. Like you guys think, a square-headed, square-eyed needle? No, that's going to rub the thread.
Put that in the bin with the 100 extra tampons.
Exactly. That was exactly the story I thought of. Don't send them into the store to get tools.
That's so funny.
All kinds of good pictures in the back here of people sewing stuff at NASA. So this book I really recommend. It's a hardback. I got it from Powell's Books up in Portland. I don't use Amazon. I suggest you don't either if you've got. Well, we don't have to put that in there. But this book's only $19.
Don't use Amazon. It's silly. Get it from a used bookstore. Find a used bookstore in your town. And if you can't, then go on to the internet and find yourself a different used bookstore. Powell's in Portland, Oregon is great. Don't support Amazon. It's fine to say that.
This is published by Tilbury House, Tilbury. I'm sure they've got a website as well. But visually and story-wise, I mean, the quilting patterns and the drawings, at the end leaves here, there's drawings of the shuttle that show where the blankets go. So just all kinds of information in here. So for somebody like myself who's been into space since before I was born and then sewing, I mean, this book was like, when I found out about this, I'm like, I've got to have that.
So, fun fact, I'm currently working on rebuilding my Lego space shuttle because that's the kind of person that I am.
Yeah.
And I'm actively putting on the engines parts
We
on the
gotta
back
sew
is
some
literally
little miniature
what I'm doing today.
blankets.
No, it's all plastic and snaps together. I'm just looking for one piece I can't find. But in any case, I was assembling the engines today, this morning. And because as you're putting Lego stuff together, that's, space engineer fun stuff, a lot of the stuff is, you don't really know why it exists. You're like, well, why isn't this just a solid piece? Why are there 4 pieces I have to put together? And the implication is because they took the real thing and they translated it into Lego, right? So these 4 pieces represent, a collapse of the actual shuttle into things. And so it makes sense that the engines have 4 different pieces. And one of those plastic pieces, presumably, is specifically the fabric blanket quilted shroud layer being represented in Lego.
Oh, wow. So I'm looking at the pictures here, and these are the big engine nozzles that stick out the back.
Uh-huh.
There's 3 of them?
Yep.
Yeah. And it says around each one is a dome heat shield blanket. So it's probably white.
Yeah, there's a big grayish shroud layer that goes on the outside of the 3 inner parts that are the actual engine.
Ah, there it is. Here it is. Oh, yes. Oh, cool. So fabric has been rendered in polystyrene.
Yeah, it doesn't have quilt designs on it or anything, but there is a piece that represents that. And as you're describing that, I'm like, I know which Lego piece that is.
It's like there's the blankets. Oh, I had heard about this way back. I watched the first shuttle launch in April 1981. I watched that. On TV. We were gathered. I remember watching the moon landing in 1969. It's like, they're going to launch it, and I remember where I was when Challenger and Columbia, these things are important to me. So to put this together with sewing was just, my little neurodiverse hands are flapping wildly.
And I have to remind you and also inform the audience that on my husband's side of the family, I do have a rocket scientist.
For real, that's true.
My grandfather-in-law literally was an engineer on the electrical side of things.
Did he work on
Mercury
Mercury?
and
Yes,
Apollo missions?
yes.
Yes, he was on the Mercury and Apollo programs as a really top-level electrical engineer.
Oh, man. That is so cool.
So not at all near the sewing whatsoever. Probably was never in the room with the seamstress people.
But check this out.
Part of the program.
Your husband is the kind of guy that can stand next to a computer and it fixes itself.
It's true. It's true. It's happened too many times to be random.
His office is right next to your sewing room. So what about that?
Well, he hasn't made the embroidery machine magically fix itself. So
It's no.
It's because it's not a computer problem.
That's because he's
It's
technical.
a mechanical problem. Yeah,
it's a mechanical problem. Yeah.
And also, present day, Artemis.
Talk about it.
Okay, so for anyone that doesn't know, we're going back to the moon, kind of, sorta. We have now the mythical twin sister of Apollo, Artemis, is the new mission to go back to the moon. We've sent one successful unmanned mission.
Unstaffed,
And this is now Apollo 2. We're sending up a crewed mission that will orbit the moon. They're not going to land, but they are going to orbit. We're going to send 4 people. And they're going to go technically the farthest into space anyone ever has. They're going to orbit the moon at a wider distance than Apollo did. So they're going to get a wider field of view. They're going to be out of contact with Earth for 40 minutes when they go around the dark side, the far side. And the launch window, I believe, opens up in 3 days from when we're recording this. And then it's going to be open for like 6 weeks. There will be a series of dates that allow them to do it. They've moved the rocket out to the launch pad. That's a Lego set I really want to buy. It's really expensive because obviously, but I really want to buy it. But it's out there. It's on the launch pad. They're doing all of their, preliminary tests and interviews, and like they're really gearing up to hopefully launch in as little as a week. Like potentially by the next time we record, Artemis 2 will have launched potentially.
Does that depend on weather mostly for the launch?
Mostly weather.
Yeah. Okay.
Because the launch window is about the proximity of all the celestial bodies, and then what determines if they can go or not is both if the rocket passes all of its, go, no-go tests day of, and also the weather. The weather really matters. Punching through serious turbulence is not an option.
And having it be above freezing on the launch pad. We're looking at you, Challenger.
Yeah, exactly. All of those things have to check out. But yeah, it's like a several week-long window where the celestial bodies will be frequently ready to go. So
now, another thing, since there have been astronaut accidents and test pilot accidents, the astronauts will be wearing their pressure suits while they're in the thing, I believe.
Yeah.
While they're actually in, even though they're not going out.
Oh, yeah.
There are no spacewalks, but they'll be wearing... They have all their little...
Yeah, I was watching a video on YouTube just yesterday about the kinds of, practice that they've been doing. And yes, it shows them in suits in the test capsule, practicing all of their maneuvers fully suited up.
There was some conjecture about the Challenger crew. If they had been in their pressure suits, they would have easily survived the initial event, but not the smackdown onto the sea. But if they had survived the initial event and then could eject somehow like fighter pilots. So every time there's a problem, think of the first guy that went up in the balloon and froze his hands off, and now we've got spacesuits.
And I've watched some cool videos about, the next actual spacesuit of the future and how they're going to design that. There's lots of different competing designs for how do we upgrade from the big bulky suit that we have now, which yes, it works, but it's also really big and bulky. Can we make it easier? I know that there's, for anyone who lives under a rock and doesn't know, Project Hail Mary, the movie, is coming out in March. And one of the little lines in the book that I doubt is going to be relevant to the movie world building, even though it's obviously there, is that that the author actually says we've got a better spacesuit now, so it doesn't take hours to get in and out of the spacesuit, which space movies never depict it taking a long time to get in and out. And in the book of Project Hail Mary, he actually says we fixed that with engineering. I bet the movie will just slide on by it. But yeah, trying to design a better spacesuit is still a thing that's being worked on. There's still people trying to, compete and engineer something that is more flexible, more better. And I bet there's still a lot of homey sewing skills in the background of that quest.
Wow, we have so much new types of fabric and ways of putting it together now. I just bought, speaking of Playtex, just bought some new bras, and they're all like this weird heat molded stuff. There's no stitching on them anywhere. Very strange. So, my cat's trying to send an email.
Sewing and space. It's going to be a thing that continues on for a long time. You don't think of it as being super relevant, but I don't think we'll ever get away from it. I think sewing and space will always have stuff to do with each other.
And rockets, I don't know if rockets have parachutes anymore. They used to.
Oh, yeah. They still use parachutes when people come down.
The shuttle had parachutes behind it to slow it down when it landed. So
when they drop astronauts back down from the space station, they always have. I guess the reusable rockets, those ones don't have parachutes because of the whole thing where they're using their own rockets to propel themselves back down to the pad. But the capsules with the people in it still parachute down.
Yeah. That's cool. Man, think of anything. This has been as far as our... what were we talking about today? We're talking about sewing culture and the weird places that sewing machines show up and sewists show up. And sewing in space. I want to see somebody actually take a featherweight up and sew. How does it affect the tension?
Well, Chris Hadfield took up a guitar.
He did?
Also a gorilla suit.
Oh!
He took up a gorilla suit.
Somebody needs to take up some quilt squares. Be piecing. Well, no, because they don't allow pins and pokey things, right?
You could, but you could take up the glue, the glue stuff.
Right.
Sew in there.
Don't take a rotary cutter. No!
Yeah, no rotary cutters, no scissors, no needles. I really do feel like sewing in space we might need to wait until we have a more metal shrouded living environment, space station kind of thing. Less of a lifeboat for science and more of a we're a spacefaring species now kind of environment.
After 9/11 and all the restrictions on what you could take into an airplane, the grandmas of the world had a shit fit that, we need to be able to take our needles and little sewing. So there's actually, you can take sewing supplies on the plane, but the scissors have to be under this long and that and the other. And you can even take your featherweight on the airplane. You can't get it out and sew with it. But TSA knows how to deal with sewing machines in the air. How to pack it, and they know that when this little weird box comes through the X-ray, they know what it is.
It's not a complicated bomb; it's a featherweight. It's a different kind of complicated.
I often take a little tiny hand piecing thing on the plane because it keeps me calm. So just tiny little needles, just something to do that isn't. I have another drink. Don't have a drink. Do some patchwork. And whether you're flying, driving, or sitting on the couch, stay threaded!
And there you have it, a loving examination of how sewing and spacefaring have never not been related. We talked about human hailstones, spacesuits being lingerie, forgot the name of Valentina Tereshkova, but remembered Sally Ride, the sewing machine named Lurch, who went from sewing saddles to shuttle blankets, the upcoming Artemis launch, and Jean Wright. As promised, I've got some short follow-up tangents to go on with respect to some of these topics. The name of the first human woman in space was indeed Valentina, as I just said. Valentina Tereshkova was the first woman in space, as well as the youngest human ever at the time at age 26, and still the youngest woman to this day and one of the youngest humans ever, as well as the only woman to have ever done a solo space mission. Reading about her training and life story and experiences on Wikipedia was a cool journey. And then I got to her later political career, which ended before I was even born and mostly didn't make much sense to me because I don't really know very much about that part of the world and timeline in a level of detail that would make what I read on Wikipedia make sense. Seems like she had a powerful and influential career on the basis of being a highly popular national hero, which, makes sense. I also learned that apparently there were a lot of streets and monuments in Ukraine that were named for her during the Soviet era that have since been renamed because she's pro-Russia in that current conflict. Jean Wright update. Somehow we never even asked the question of if Jean Wright was related to the Wright brothers. I still don't know, but I did find out that you can still book her as a NASA speaker. She's a docent for them. And she's done speaking events with the astronaut Karen Nyberg, who I literally just yesterday saw a post about her own illustrated children's books about a project to quilt in space. Apparently, she's a total textile and space nerd as well. I'm fairly certain that at this point, Mom has already ordered A Quilt of Stars by Dr. Karen Nyberg, but if not, let this be your reminder to click the link in the show notes and get that ordered. Our Patreons will even pay for it. Artemis launch update. So it hasn't happened yet, as we had hoped, because they couldn't get the hydrogen fuel to stop leaking or something like that during that first test. I'm recording this on February 18th, and they are actively working on another wet test of the system. The next actual launch date is supposed to be in March. Okay, this last point actually has nothing to do with the episode, but I'm excited about it, so I'm going to share anyway. It's my show. I can do what I want. My newest podcast project has just wrapped up its first season, aka I got through the first book of a new series. I am having a fantastic time reading Dungeon Crawler Carl with my good podcast buddy Seth, who is desperately trying to increase his poker face game as I speculate wildly about what is going to happen next. The show is called Podcast It Donut and is a first-time reader experience of a book series that is currently going quite viral. The Dungeon Crawler Carl series by Matt Dinneman. And yeah, if you like my sort of take on things and my sense of humor and can tolerate an absurd, hilarious, violent nightmare adventure of a book, do think about joining us over there. I just started reading book 2 this week, and I'm very excited to continue. I know it probably isn't the speed of most people who are here into sewing and history and stuff. You all probably don't overlap too much with my more literary obsession audiences, but on the off chance that that does sound interesting to you, I'd love to have you over there as well. Well, I think that about does it for me this week. I hope you all enjoyed this spacey exploration of how sewing is integral to everything, even rocket science. As a reminder, we are unofficially sponsored by Stagecoach Road Vintage Sewing Machine. You can reach them at srvsew@gmail.com. That's srvsew@gmail.com. Follow us on social media and YouTube, and you can best support us by sharing the podcast with your friends. You can even get ad-free episodes by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/used2sew. Thank you for listening to us here at Used to Sew. We always welcome your additions, corrections, and feedback in general. Please reach out to us via email at usedtosew@gmail.com. Used to Sew is a production of Fox and Raven Media. For more podcasts from Fox and Raven Media, visit our website at foxandravenmedia.com.